Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Natira Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jai Prabhupada Jaya Prabhupada Jayam Vishnupad Paramahangsa Parivrajacharya Tadasasi Samad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki ISKCON's founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Sri Sri Radha Radhanath Ki Sri Giri Govardhan Ki Sankirtan Yagya Ki Gaur Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. We're reading today from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 31, Lord Kapila's instructions on the movements of the living entities. And I believe we're doing verses 26 and 27. Can one of you tell me? Is that correct? Anyway, we will start with 26. You got the verse there, I hope, yeah. Shayato Shuchi Paryanke Janto Swedaja Dushate Nesha Kanduyane Anganam Asanotana Cheshtane Shayato Shuchi Paryanke Jantu Swedaja Dushate Neshakandu Yanenganam Asanotana Cheshtane Shayato Shuchi Paryanke Jantu Sweda Jadushite Neshakandu Yanenganam Asanotana Cheshtane Shayato Shuchi Paryanke Jantu Sweda Jadushite Neshatan Kandu Yanengana Asanotana Cheshtane Paryanke Jantu Sweda Jadushite Neshakandu Yanengana Asanotana Chestane Shayata laid down Ashuchi Paryanke on a foul bed. Janto, the child, Swedaja, with creatures born from sweat. Dushite, infested. Naisha, incapable of. Kanduyane, scratching. Anganam, his limbs. Asana, sitting. Utana, standing. Cheshtane, or moving. Translation. Laid down in a foul bed, infested with sweat and germs. The poor child is incapable of scratching his body to get relief from his itching sensation, to say nothing of sitting up, standing, or even moving. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. It should be noted that the child is born crying and suffering. After birth, the same suffering continues, and he cries. Because he's disturbed by the germs in his foul bed, which is contaminated by his urine and stool, the poor child continues to cry. He is unable to take any remedial measure for his relief. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschachadeshtarane Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyevacha Patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shayato Shuchi Paryanke Jantu Swedaja Dushite Nesha Kanduyanenganam Asanotana Cheshtane, laid down on a foul bed, infested with sweat and germs. The poor child is incapable of scratching his body to get relief from his itching sensation, to say nothing of sitting up, standing, or even moving. Hare Krishna, yes. continuing the graphic description of the birth of the living entity, of the human being. The principle, of course, is the same in at least the mammal species or like that. But specifically for human beings, Prabhupada says it should be noted that the child is born crying and suffering. There's a type of, well, at least I remember many years ago, means a good 50 years ago, occasionally when watching television shows, a child would be born, in the whatever, the drama or comedy or whatever, that sort of acted out type of show. And my recollection is that whenever a child would be born in those shows, the doctor, supervising doctor, would pick the child up by the feet or the legs, smack the child on the rear end, and the child would cry. And that was a sign of success. If the child cries, it means, the child has made it. The child has successfully been born. The sign of success is crying. But in material life, of course, we know crying, apart from rare cases, crying in ecstasy and pure Krishna consciousness, which really is rare. But otherwise, when people cry, it's a sign of pain, distress. If the distress becomes great enough that a person cries, it means there's really great distress. But in this case, it's taken to be a sign of success. Things have worked out nicely and the sign of that is the child is crying. Ravana, the great demon, enemy of Lord Ram, kidnapper of Mother Sita, his name, Ravana, means he who makes others cry. Prabhupada mentions that in one of the purports there in the 9th canto. And Maya Devi, one of her names translates as she who can make you cry forever. That's material life. There are different levels in material life and different experiences of different, at least shall we say, people, and what to speak of other species. But there's a lot of difficulty. There's really a lot of difficulty in material life. Of course, the way material life is portrayed in television and movies and that sort of the entertainment industry, a lot of it, at least traditionally, there's always a happy ending, whatever the problems may have been in the course of the movie or whatever it is. Even I remember in my early youth, James Dean, Rebel Without a Cause. It's quite likely none of you would remember that. You should, yeah. You should remember that. It's one of the, great classics of a social rebel, and a real getting mixed up in all sorts of nonsense. But the film, and people are being killed and all sorts of just, extreme violence and all that. But at the end, James Dean, who died just very shortly afterwards, I think at the age of 26, he and his girlfriend go to meet her parents because they're going to get married. And that's the end of this. You don't need to do it, but if you do, look it up and you'll see James Dean, Rebel Without a Cause. What a classic of social, commentary and difficulty. But there's a happy ending. Nowadays, of course, there's not always happy endings from what I hear. Yeah, but the thing is that the reality of material life, not as it's portrayed in advertising and so on. The reality of material life is crying. There's a lot of pain, really a lot of pain and difficulty, and the portraying of material life with the happy ending, they all lived happily ever after, and that sort of thing is basically fictitious or at best quite rare. Yes, and even, I've mentioned this before, it's something I read a devotee wrote in Back to Godhead quite many years ago about one of those typical happy ending stories. If I remember correctly, Sleeping Beauty is that Prince Charming rescues Sleeping Beauty at the last moment, just when all appeared to be lost. But then he rescues her, and they go riding off into the sunset or sunrise, or just riding off. A happy couple, a really happy couple. But then the devotee elaborated further that Prince Charming and I think it was Sleeping Beauty, then of course they got married, another happiness, great happiness, having, got away from it all. They get married, but then because they're so attracted on the bodily platform, before they know it, they have 15 children, and which is a challenge. It's more than a challenge. It's not humanly possible to deal with. And Prince Charming has to work 3 jobs because not only is it very difficult in just the interactions of the children, but children are expensive. So he has to work 3 jobs. When he comes home at night, then Sleeping Beauty, after having to deal with 15 children on her own, is just about to have a nervous breakdown every evening. So as soon as he walks through the door, she informs him, shall we say, very clearly how she feels and what the day has been like, which was extremely bad. And so this, after his 3 jobs, he has to somehow digest this. So the devotee said that eventually they divorced. And that was the actual end of the story. Not when they rode off into the sunset, and the story says they all lived happily ever after. So this is the thing here. Material life is like that. Perhaps I'm sure we've all had some experience. I think some of us have really had a lot of experience of that, the pain of material existence. And this is how it begins. This is how it begins. Under the normal circumstances, the child is born just in the regular way, which is already painful enough. And we read 2 days ago on Wednesday, Prabhupada said that it's such a difficult situation, the pangs of birth, then after 10 months being forcibly pushed out, and, where was it? Anyway, Prabhupada did make the point that in some cases, sometimes the trouble is so severe that the child comes out dead or almost dead. And I don't know how it happened, but in my version of Prabhupada's books on computer, where Prabhupada says, sometimes the trouble is so severe that the child comes out. The out has a capital O. Does it in your version? 23. The child comes out. Capital O. Dead or almost dead. These things happen because it's so severe. The regular form of childbirth is so severe that the child comes out, sort of like, wow, out, dead or almost dead. And, I mentioned the other day, having read somewhere, Prabhupada saying that not every child, as they're within the womb in the last some number of weeks, I recall having read Prabhupada saying that they don't all come to that consciousness, like real consciousness of my situation, what's happening to me, and then praying to the Lord. They don't necessarily all. Whether they all do or not, the thing is, there's, I forget the song, but there's one song, as I recall, of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, of a child being born and then being, accepted by the family members, and it's all, it's a bit exciting for the family members. They like to come and see the newborn child and play around and interact with the child in their sort of affectionate and childish type ways. But Prabhupada explains there very clearly that when the child comes out, even if the child had been conscious in the womb, like really conscious like that, to the point of praying and really understanding the situation and how too much disadvantageous that whole process is. But when the child comes out, and the parents and the uncles and the aunties and the grannies and the grandfathers and the brothers and sisters and cousins and neighbors and friends and just others who happen along make a fuss about the child, the child suddenly from being cramped up in the womb, undergoing all these horrors and being aware of it. Now suddenly the child has become the star of life, the central point of life, at least within the general vicinity. And so the child forgets. Just like I was reading, where was I reading? Was it? No. Anyway, I was reading some other verses on the subject, and Srila Prabhupada, in one of the purports there, said that for a lady, the experience of regular childbirth is so painful. Prabhupada says that the mother, as she's going through it, building up to the actual delivery, the mother may sort of take a vow, I won't do this again. It's too much. You two have given birth, so you can comment. And it is, yeah? It is. That's another thing. That's what we were saying. Yeah. That's material life. And I was just thinking a little bit today, but I was thinking yesterday more, how we read in the previous chapter the hellish experience of dying and then being dragged away by the Yamadutas and going through all that happens there. And I remember as we were going through that, day by day, I remember myself thinking, my gosh, it's so important to not have to go through it again. And now here's the next stage, being born again. And it's the same idea, wow, we really don't want to go through that again. But particularly yesterday, I was thinking, it's so easy to forget. Like the previous chapter, the sufferings of death, and just shortly after death. It's so easy to forget. If not become totally oblivious, but at least that the vivid impression that we may have felt when we're going through those verses in the previous chapter, that vivid impression and the quite deep conviction that never again, must not, it can at least easily sort of ease off and become like, yeah, it would be better not. Or something like that, which means, you've taken a few steps down the road to actually forgetting it completely. And at least to the point where it's no longer like a real consideration that, I must be careful about avoiding, continuing the process of birth and death and all that. Maya, the material nature, is very amazing. There's the covering potency and the throwing potency of Maya. Throwing, there are different ways of looking at it, but throwing basically means that a person is simply plunged just inescapably into these types of sufferings. just thrown into it and unable, it's too late, can't do anything. Yeah. But before that, one's knowledge is covered. And that's Maya. Well, these are the two potencies of Maya. We forget, our knowledge is covered, and we forget all these different types of things. We forget, and, like the manifestation, or one of the very important manifestations of that being covered, is that one no longer takes seriously the hardships of material life. And rather one thinks, yes, life is going on, it's okay, or even it's quite good. But then the throwing potency, you get thrown down, smashed down. And then one is reawakened, and one considers, like we're saying, never again, not again. Please, I couldn't take it. But it's just an interesting question to just consider. It's not possible to answer it exactly. But how many times have we, us, however many, we're 10 or 12 sitting here, how many times have we been awakened to the undesirable nature of birth, death, old age, and disease? How many times? But then how many times have we then somehow proceeded to forget about it? At least to the point where we don't really, become really active in avoiding it, in the process of getting out of birth and death. How many times? I suspect it's a number of times. And it could be quite a significant number of times. As I said, we don't know. I don't think we can know. But I think that it's been really quite a number of times. So is this time just going to be the next time, or is it going to be the last time? Who said that? Oh, okay. I just heard this voice, the last time. Not very convincing. It was definitely not like, the last time. Oh. Anyway, don't mind us, but still, it's interesting. I mean, all these things are interesting. We have to consider our situations and not just take it for granted. Taking things for granted, familiarity breeds contempt. And it's not just familiarity with each other. We see each other every day, literally, and for hours every day. And, things crop up between us, which make us think, oh my gosh, it's him again or it's her again. Yeah, so things crop up. Familiarity breeds contempt. But it's not just in the interpersonal sense. You could say contempt is not exactly the right word, but we become familiar with Krishna consciousness. And the manifestation is just like we were saying, that these warnings and the necessities of getting out of material life and the necessity of becoming more Krishna conscious than we are, I mean, actually probably a lot more Krishna conscious than we are, that necessity ceases to appear to be a necessity, and it just becomes one of those things in life. So a devotee is a person who is really tuned into reality. A successful devotee is a devotee who really takes these things very seriously and works on an ongoing program of preparation for getting out of material life, for coming to higher levels of Krishna consciousness. This is really Krishna consciousness, to do like that. And not just become familiar and just think, oh, I'm a devotee, it's okay. Because it's not okay. So just like Srila Prabhupada said, that, and it's not just Srila Prabhupada said, but other acharyas have said, that for a devotee, the devotee should live every day as if it's going to be his or her last. Whereas the materialist should live every day as if they're going to live forever. These two perspectives from two ends of the scale, you could say. Devotees should live every day as if it's going to be their last. One day it will be. But if we live like that every day, then we'll be alert and focused and absorbed in Krishna consciousness, absorbed in service, absorbed in the attitude, the service attitude, and always interested in understanding and very interested to do things the way they should be done. Yes. In other words, it's not some sort of fatalistic type of attitude, but it's a very, alert, tuned in, conscious type of attitude, a very positive attitude. Whereas the non-devotee, their business, their idea is to enjoy as much as they possibly can, which is not a lot, but still as much as is possible. And if they're always thinking, oh my gosh, I could die. I could die here, I could die there, I could die when I do this, I could die when I do that. How are they going to get into their program of enjoyment? But if they think, I'll never die, then there's nothing to restrict their consciousness in a certain sense. But they can just give heart and soul without distraction, without being distracted by the negativity of material life. They can give heart and soul to trying to enjoy, which is what they want to do. Which of course is stupid, but that's not the point. That's not the point. The point for them is how to maximize the enjoyment. That's the point. And to have some lingering sense of doom, just around the corner or just coming up behind my back, something like that, that's going to just interfere. More than interfere, it's going to destroy your mood of getting into your enjoyment. So, but the thing is, as described here, it all begins at the time of birth. The fact that material life is suffering begins at the time of birth, becomes the first vivid experience of the reality is at the time of birth, in that, classically, as we said, we hear at least, a child needs to be smacked on the rear end, which is not fun. Previously in the womb, it was just being sort of nipped by worms and things, but now you get a full smack on the rear end, and then you cry. And if you cry, it's a success. Imagine, isn't it amazing? If someone cries, that's a good sign. How could it be? Can't be. It's all mixed up. And from there on, you may become the center of attention for a while, but it all sort of tapers off when the next child is born or something like that. Yeah, you suddenly find you're no longer the center of attention. Or like the husband we read, the husband as a young man, he's young, he's strong, he's bright, and in creative ways he's providing for the family, and the family is like, oh, my dear husband, oh, you're bringing so much in. Oh, it's so nice. And the children are, oh, Daddy, you brought me a present again. And all these types of things. But then when he reaches a certain age, which many of us have reached. I think you reached it. Yeah. You can't perform. You can't perform in those, the noble husband ways, the noble father ways. You just can't do it. You just run out of steam. And then you become like a liability in the family. Park him off on the side somewhere and just stick some leftover food in front of him every now and then. And the rest of the time, who cares? Material life, it's nasty. It's nasty. Like we said, it's portrayed in a certain way in advertising and traditionally in entertainment. It's portrayed in a certain way. But the reality, being portrayed in the usual way, just means they're trying to get you to buy things so they can take your money from you. That's really what it's about. So a devotee is a person who is awake to these realities and not living in some, sort of quasi-dream world or partial dream world where there's Krishna consciousness, but there's still many conceptions left over from material life. That the type of optimism for material life, how we can be successful. So there, yes, the child is born crying and suffering. After birth, the same suffering continues, and he cries because he's disturbed by the germs in his foul bed, which is contaminated by his urine and stool. The poor child continues to cry. Because when the child's very small, child can't do anything. There's a festival in Vedic culture, and it's there in the description of Krishna's pastimes, that when the child, after, you can tell us, I believe it may be 3 months or something, when the child becomes able to actually roll over, they have a festival. how long is that? 3 months? 2, 3, 4? How many? About 4 months. Child becomes able to roll over. What about rolling back? When does that come? After 6 months. Got to stay there for a couple of months. Anyway, I believe you. It's 4 months, let's say. But up until that time, the child is completely incapable, basically. And as is said here, the poor child, the child's being bitten by these different germs and so on, but the child is incapable of scratching the body. They can't even relieve themselves in that way. They're just sort of flapping. And mum comes or someone comes and sees the child's disturbed, and whoever the adult is tries to figure out, what's the problem? Why is the child crying? And sometimes the parent or the adult thinks, child is crying because he's too cold. Actually, the child is crying because he's too hot. But, he's too cold, so let's wrap him up more. So it becomes worse. And the child cries more. And the parent or the adult just can't understand. The child is incapable of conveying the message. And the adult is incapable of deducing, observing and figuring out what must it be. So there you go, devotees. We really need to become Krishna conscious. As Srila Rupa Goswami said, Yena Kena Prakarena Mana Krishna Naveshayet. In this way or in that way, but in some way, always remember Krishna. Whatever it takes, do it. But remember Krishna. Hare Krishna. Any comment or question? Swarup Damodar Prabhu. Right.
And I thought it's because we are so consumed with, it's actually sort of like a selfish type of consideration, my pain, my anxiety, my suffering. And unless the child or the soul elevates the consciousness to Krishna consciousness, giving Krishna pleasure, there's always the tendency to fall back into that suffering. Because even from being liberated, you can come back down, because it's just, it's selfish.
Yes.
Unless they really take the Krishna, serious Krishna consciousness, giving Krishna pleasure, and then enjoying the pleasure that comes from giving Krishna pleasure, always come back.
That's true. That's a very good point. And to go from that point of, my fantastic suffering, which I must not go through again, to go from that to, I must give Krishna pleasure. There's a bit of a gap to be covered there. Yeah, a bridge, you got to cross the bridge. And it's a bit of a big bridge. But I guess then the association of devotees is a very important factor. At least in devotee families, there's a much better chance of being exposed to those teachings and thereby getting the idea, must serve Krishna. But otherwise, I think, it's quite easy to understand. If the person, the child, is in such, so focused on themselves, and then, the extreme pain and difficulty, etc. And then when they're released from that, it's quite an experience. And the tendency would be to think, I'm okay now. So association of devotees must be there in order to be able to cross the gap, step across onto the other side. Thank you. Marie. Say that again, your own superficiality. Right. So you got to work on that. That was what you said. Yes. Encourage us too. We should all encourage each other. Keep going. Don't just get into some kind of mixed comfort zone and feel that that's good enough. We need, as devotees progress, or, as time passes, at least, put it that way. But say, as devotees progress in Krishna consciousness, they get put in different situations by Krishna, which are actually designed to give stimulus for not being superficial and not becoming, lethargic and apathetic and like that. But we may complain. You may complain if it ever happens to you. You become chairman of the GBC body, and there's just all this, just amazing craziness and related all around you, and you think, come on, why do I have to deal with this? I'm just waiting for, it's 7 months, and then life will be better. But actually, Krishna puts us in situations which are relevant to us in terms of where we are and where we need to go. Krishna's a really intelligent person. Sometimes he's a bit too intelligent for us. We have to catch up. It's not easy. Yes. Yeah, you do it.
And then karma comes at the same time.
Well, it's as Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, the intricacies of action are very difficult to understand. But basically, you can say, more or less, that you have certain desires as opposed to some other types of desires. You have certain specific desires, and it's very much linked with your karma. You're human. You're in a human body, female, certain age. So therefore, you tend to have certain desires or types of desires. If you were in a male body or some animal's body or younger body or, something quite different, then you would be prone to have different desires. to, in many ways. So our independence to desire is generally described as being minute. Minute and not like, just great independence you can desire. There's a whole spectrum of things. But, there's different possibilities, but not like an unlimited spectrum. And that's been already dictated because of your karma, because of what you did previously. So now you arrive in this situation with the tendencies to desire in certain ways and not really in many other ways. So minute independence, not great independence, but there's some. And so then you desire within that sort of range of possible desires, and then you execute the desire, and then you get the karma, basically. An example which is given, it's not actually by Prabhupada, it's in the Bhagavatam, later cantos, like 11th, I think, or maybe 10th. The devotee commentator gives the example that it's like you have a particular body. It's got a particular nature, and you've got a particular type of psychology, basically. He says that it's like if you go on a flight, you get on the plane, and you can do certain things, but you can't do too many things because you're on the plane. Yeah, you can do some things. There is some range, but it's not great. But then when you get off the flight, then however you conducted yourself on the plane, then there'll be certain consequences. Maybe you'll just get off and go to your holiday place or your family's place, but maybe you'll make a friend on the airplane. And that'll be, something which will develop now throughout the rest of your life. Or maybe you'll you'll commit a crime on the plane and be arrested. So it's a fairly good example that there are different things we can desire, but they're limited. And then we'll get the consequences in due course. How does that sound?
Even if the desire is Krishna conscious.
Well, then, of course it's different in the sense that Krishna's part of it. But you won't get karma for it. If it's a good Krishna conscious desire and you really try to fulfill it, you'll get mercy and you'll make progress. You won't get karma. But for ordinary people, they'll get the karma in due course, which will form their next desire, or inform or influence their next desires, from which will come their next activities, from which will come their next karma, and it goes on like that. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.